Hello everyone, I am Demented Kirby, and welcome to my channel, the Commander Tavern. The Commander Tavern is a channel dedicated to my favorite Magic the Gathering format. The Brewery is a series on this channel showcasing my spicy brews and the deck techs. On this episode of The Brewery, I will be discussing my take on a commander from Theros Beyond Death, just spoiled a couple of days ago, Heliod Sun Crowned. If you like this deck or any of the cards I'll be mentioning throughout the video, please consider using my TCG Player affiliate link when purchasing those cards. You can find that link down in the description. It'll really help out the channel. Other ways you can help support the channel is with my Patreon. Patrons get early access to scheduled videos on YouTube, and higher tier patrons get access to the VIP section of my Discord server as well. You can find a link to that down in the description too. Alright, let's get back to the episode. Heliod Sun Crowned is a 5/5 enchantment creature god with indestructible for 2 generic and 1 white. Once your devotion to white is 5 or greater, he's a creature. Whenever you gain life, he puts a +1/+1 counter on target creature or enchantment you control. This is important since he's able to put +1/+1 counters on himself even if he's not a creature yet. However, we're going to mostly use that ability on other creatures, some in particular, but we'll get into that soon enough. His final ability enables the middle one since you can pay 2 mana to give lifelink to another target creature. This can also be used politically since you can give lifelink to an opponent's creature in order to gain a favor later on. However, for this particular build, that's not a focus of it. This is a combo deck through and through. However, Mono White has a couple of ailments in Commander that are slowly but at least surely getting fixed by Wizards. People tend to stray from Mono White since it lacks strong ramping and drawing. However, White still has access to colorless methods of drawing cards. So first, let's see how this deck will operate against its shortcomings in order to see how this will benefit the combo strategies. First up, let's see about card draw. Arcane Encyclopedia is strictly better than JM Dai Tome since it costs 1 less to cast and 1 less to activate. It's a pretty straightforward draw effect. It's great to use at the end of the turn before yours if you haven't used the mana earlier. Mind's Eye might be a bit overcosted, but it's great in a multiplayer game. Whenever an opponent draws a card, you can pay 1 to draw a card also. Even if your opponents only drew 1 card their turn, in 1 round you paid 3 to draw 3 cards. Sandstone Oracle is another draw effect that depends on opponents. It might cost 7 to cast, but if an opponent has a handful of cards, you can draw into a bunch of cards thanks to it. It's also a 4/4 with flying, so there's that too. Alms Collector also depends on opponents drawing cards. A great hate bear, the collector can be flashed in response to an opponent casting something like Stroke of Genius. Instead of drawing X cards, they only draw 1 card and you draw 1 card also. Fortunately, this is a static effect, so as long as it's on the board, you can continue to deprive opponents of drawing into a ton of cards. You can even combine this with cards like Howling Mind, Font of Mythos, etc. to really go the extra mile. Seer's Sundial lets us draw a card by paying 2 whenever a land enters the battlefield under our turn. This might seem slow, but this deck does 1 raise of getting at least 1 land in play per turn, so it is possible to draw into a ton of cards over the course of a game thanks to it. Endless Atlas is another draw effect that depends on our lands. It only costs 2 to cast and 2 to activate, but you need at least 3 lands with the same name on the battlefield. That's fine because as a monocolored deck, this is going to be the case most of the time. Well of Lost Dreams depends on us gaining life, but that's fine because we have a lifelink provider right in the command zone. Whenever we gain life, we can pay X up to how much life we gained in order to draw that many cards. This is a great effect because we can gain life at will in this deck, so we can be able to activate it in turns besides our own. Mindless Automaton is great in this deck because it's card draw without investing in mana. We simply remove 2 +1/+1 counters from it in order to draw a card. That's not that difficult to achieve here since our commander facilitates +1/+1 counters. Skullclamp, Idol of Oblivion, and Mentor of the Meek are creature-dependent forms of card draw. However, this deck has token strategies which we're going to see soon enough. Thanks to those tokens, Skullclamp basically reads as pay 1 mana to draw 2 cards. It also helps Idol of Oblivion draw us a card if we created a token that turn. Since all the tokens created in the deck are weenies, whenever we create one, we can pay 1 to draw a card thanks to Mentor of the Meek. The final draw effect in the deck isn't technically card draw, and that's Scroll Rack. What Scroll Rack does is that it essentially switches cards in your hands with cards on the top of your library. This might not seem like much, but the deck is running fetch lands, which will allow you to shuffle the deck after using Scroll Rack. The deck's also running land tax. With land tax, if you have less lands than an opponent at the beginning of your upkeep, you can search for up to 3 basic lands and put them in your hand. After you play 1, you can then activate Scroll Rack in order to put those on top of your library. If at the beginning of your upkeep you still have less land than an opponent, you search your library once more for up to 3 basic lands and put them into your hand. This shuffles your library so you won't have those cards you put on there with Scroll Rack anymore. So this is a great way to dig through your deck as well as securing a land drop per turn, at least until you have as many lands as the player with most lands. Another one of Mono White's ailments is mana advantage, so let's see how this deck makes up for that shortcoming as well. I already mentioned land tax. However, land tax doesn't just work with Scroll Rack. You can also use land tax to secure a land per turn until matching the opponent with most lands. Yeah, with multiple lands in hand, you can still drop them onto the battlefield with Walking Atlas and Terrain Generator. These allow you to potentially drop more than one land during your turn, as well as even dropping lands during your opponent's turns. Unfortunately, Terrain Generator can only drop basic lands and it costs 2 and tapping each time to do so. At least its ability is on a mana producing land that doesn't enter the battlefield tapped, so it's got that going for it. Walking Atlas is great in that it's cheap to cast, activates with just tapping, and can drop any land without restriction. This goes great with Thawing Glaciers. Although it enters the battlefield tapped and doesn't provide any mana, you can use it to ramp for a basic land. It might seem slow since we have to return it to our hand at the end of the turn after we activate it. However, Walking Atlas can put it back onto the battlefield. Other ways to put lands straight onto the battlefield include Wayfarer's Bauble, Burnished Heart, and Solemn Simulacrum. A turn 1 Wayfarer's Bauble means having 3 lands on turn 2. A turn 3 Burnished Heart means having 6 lands on turn 4. Both of these require being sacrificed as part of their activation. On the other hand, Solemn Simulacrum ramps for a basic land when it enters the battlefield. As a bonus, it draws you a card when it dies, which helps for that other challenge of playing Mono White. As with every other deck, Mono White can also benefit from cheap mana rocks like Mox Diamond, Mox Opal, Chrome Mox, Mox Amber, Mana Crypt, Mana Vault, and Soul Ring. There's no doubt as to the benefits of getting these out in the early game, and that's something that I'll definitely be discussing soon enough in this deck tech video. A bit on the more expensive side of things are Nyx Lotus, Gilded Lotus, and Coveted Jewel. Nyx Lotus might enter the battlefield tapped, but in a monocolored deck like this one, the amount of mana it can potentially generate is ridiculous. Coveted Jewel costs a whopping 6 mana to cast, but it does tap for 3 mana of any one color as well as drawing us 3 cards when it enters the battlefield. So just like Solemn Simulacrum, it helps ease 2 challenges in a single card. Other ways in the deck to accelerate mana is with Smothering Tithe, now a staple in every deck that can run it and for good reason. Even if your opponents pay its tax, they're 2 mana down for casting things. If they don't pay for it, then they accelerate your game. But them slowing themselves down by 2 just to prevent you from accelerating by 1 is still technically accelerating us, so it's win-win regardless. And if a whole round passes where no one pays its tax, that's 3 treasure tokens we just created for our next turn. Extraplanar Lands is a way for lands to generate an additional mana when tapped for mana. Ideally, we don't want our opponents to benefit from it, so the deck runs only Snow Basics, 23 to be exact, so that it won't apply to opponents' basic lands too. So the lens makes these lands tap for 2 white at the expense of imprinting one of them on it when it enters the battlefield. On the topic of lands that provide 2 mana, the deck's running Ancient Tomb, Temple of the False God, and Karoo. With the number of basic lands in the deck, it shouldn't be a problem to play Karoo. Also, the deck's naturally running Nykthos Shrine to Nyx. This land is crazy in a monocolored deck. We might have to pay 2 and tap it in order to get that mana, but in return, we'll get the same amount of white mana for every white pip in our card's casting cost. Earlier I mentioned a token subtheme in the deck, which is great for cards like Ashland's Altar and Phyrexian Altar. Mono White does excel in creating volumes of creature tokens since it's about quantity over quality, and what better way to use those weenies than by sacrificing them for value. These altars will reappear in the video later on as enablers for the combos I've been mentioning so far. Since we'll be gaining life in this deck, we also want to prevent opponents from wanting to attack us in order to bring us back down to their level. Thus, the deck runs plenty of Pillow Fort effects. Enchantments that accomplish this include Ghostly Prison and Sphere of Safety. The deck is a bit light on enchantments, but Sphere of Safety will still tax opponents enough to make up for it when combined with the other Pillow Forts on the battlefield. Norn's Annex is the artifact Pillow Fort of the deck. What's great about the Annex is that opponents pay 1 Phyrexian white mana per creature, so if an opponent can't generate white mana, they have to pay 2 life each time. At a low enough life, it might not be worth it to swing our way. Archon of Absolution, Baird Steward of Argive, and Windborne Muse are creatures with the same effect. Unfortunately, these are easy to get rid of since they're creatures, but in the meantime they hold down the fort by taxing opponents who want to attack us. Archangel of Tides is also included in the deck, but it only works when untapped, so you can't attack with it unless it has Vigilance. At least on its own, it increases your devotion to white by 3. Glacial Chasm is included in case of emergencies. We gain enough life in the deck where we can drop this onto the battlefield and hold out a bit until we develop a board state beneficial enough until we can let it go without paying its cumulative upkeep cost. We can't attack, but that's fine because this is more of a combo deck, so victory won't necessarily come from combat. Alright, so what else do we got besides preventing attacks? Getting smacked by creatures isn't the only problem we face in a multiplayer Commander game. We need all kinds of responses. Besides the previously mentioned hate bears, the deck also runs Containment Priest. We can flash it in response to an opponent trying to cheat a fatty onto the battlefield. Then, while it remains on the battlefield, opponents won't be able to cheat in anything else. Other ways of exiling threats is with Path to Exile, Swords to Plowshares, and Scour from Existence. The first two can only target creatures and give opponents a slight consolation prize in exchange for only costing 1 white mana. But Scour from Existence can hit any target with no benefit to its controller at the expense of costing 7 generic mana. Other instant speed responses are Generous Gift and Oblation. Generous Gift can also target any permanent, but it destroys it instead of exiling it, and its controller gets a 3/3 green elephant creature token for their trouble. Oblation bypasses Indestructible by shuffling the non-land permanent into its controller's library. Its controller might get to draw 2 cards afterwards, but recall that if we have Alms Collector in play, that they only draw 1 and we draw the other. In case of a severe emergency, we have Planner Cleansing and Hour of Revelation. These straight up wipe the board of anything that isn't a land. More often than not, Hour of Revelation only costs 3 white to cast. These might be used in case of emergencies, but sometimes it's best to lose your board state than to lose the game. The final response in the deck is Teferi's Protection. This card is so great it even protects us against an overloaded Cyclonic Rift. If we have the mana for it, casting it in response to the previously mentioned cards like Hour of Revelation means that we'll have all of our permanents phase out before the board wipe resolves, meaning that they'll phase back in at the beginning of our untap step and we'd be the only ones keeping our board state. We can also use Teferi's Protection as a way to freeze our life in case we were to die, or to give ourselves protection from anything in case an opponent were to steal our turn or target us with target opponent loses the game effects, and so on. Then, if we need to recycle any of these effects, we can just activate Elixir of Immortality to shuffle them back into our library. We also gain 5 life, which is more than just a bonus since Heliod cares about us gaining life. Let's finally talk about the tokens aspect of the deck. Mono white might be a bit slow to pull off since it lacks the drawing and mana capabilities of other colors. So, we have to make it harder for opponents to play their game while also protecting ourselves in the meantime. So even though it's a bit slower, we make everyone else slow too with all the control effects mentioned previously. Dawn of Hope is a token generator that functions twofold since it also provides card draw. Every time we gain life, we can pay 2 mana to draw a card. Additionally, the tokens it creates have lifelink, which is great for Heliod. Speaking of, Heliod, God of the Sun, is also included in the deck. Not only does the original Heliod give all of our creatures vigilance, but he's an indestructible token generator. For 4 mana, we create a 2/1 enchantment creature token. Since it's an enchantment, it also pairs well with the previously mentioned Sphere of Safety. Being 1 toughness is great for Skullclamp too. Oketra the True is another indestructible token generator. She also creates tokens for 4 mana each time. She also has double strike, but she can't attack or block unless you control 3 other creatures, which really isn't a problem in this deck. Emeria Angel creates a 1/1 flyer whenever a land enters the battlefield under our control, which, as we saw earlier in the video, is very possible to do every turn. Monastery Mentor creates a 1/1 token with prowess whenever we cast a non-creature spell, which is about 65% of our spells. Keldarin Outpost creates tokens for just 2 mana and tapping, and it's on a mana-producing land that doesn't enter the battlefield tapped. You do have to sacrifice a plains when it enters the battlefield, but we've already seen that it won't be that hard to do so in this deck. Animation Module is perhaps the best one in the deck since it triggers whenever you put a +1/+1 counter on a creature you control, which is possible thanks to Heliod's Sun Crown. Whenever you do, you pay 1 mana to create a 1/1 servo token. It also has a second ability where you can place an additional counter on the same type on a permanent that has a counter. This combos nicely with Soul Warden, Soul's Attendant, and Daxos Blessed by the Sun. Whenever a token enters the battlefield, the Soul Sisters trigger, but Daxos only triggers when it's under your control though. At least he also triggers when a creature you control dies. These are great because whenever we gain life, Heliod triggers. So you can already imagine the combo potential as well as how these pieces synergize well with each other. Let's see it in greater detail. Let's say you have Animation Module, Soul Warden, Heliod, and Ashnod's Altar in play. When you gain life, Heliod triggers. Then, you put a +1/+1 counter on a creature, say Soul Warden. Then, the module triggers. So you pay 1 and create a servo token. This token triggers the Warden, gaining you 1 life. This triggers Heliod, which puts another +1/+1 counter on a creature. This will trigger Animation Module. Now, you can sacrifice the token in response in order to generate the mana needed to pay for its ability. You're going to have 1 colorless mana left over each time. This generates infinite colorless mana as well as infinite life and infinite +1/+1 counters. If you're able to get through with any of those infinitely powered creatures, you can end the game. However, you can also end the game with Aether Flux Reservoir. Gaining infinite life means that you can also sink it into the reservoir in order to deal enough damage to everyone to win the game. Another game-winning combo in the game can be achieved with either Walking Ballista or Triskelion. The only other card you need with either of them is just Heliod Suncrowned. Giving either of these creatures lifelink provides an engine for infinite damage. Here's how it works. Let's give Triskelion lifelink. Then remove one of its +1/+1 counters to deal damage to an opponent. That triggers Heliod, which then puts a +1/+1 counter back on it. It has a net loss of 0 +1/+1 counters. Keep doing this until you snipe the table. Even though the deck does its best to dig through your library, it's important to have some form of consistency. This is why the deck's running Enlightened Tutor, Inventor's Fair, and Scrapyard Recombiner. Either of these can be used to tutor for either Walking Ballista or Triskelion. The tutor could also tutor for an enchantment, but the point is really to assemble the combo. Fortunately, both these creatures are constructs, so Scrapyard Recombiner can tutor for them. So assembling this 2-card combo is basically game over. And as stated in my thumbnail, you can achieve this on turn 1. You'd need the following God Hand: Ancient Tomb, Mox Amber, Mox Opal, Mana Crypt, Mana Vault, Soul Ring, and Walking Ballista. Play Ancient Tomb. Then cast Mox Opal and Mana Crypt. Tap the Tomb to cast Soul Ring and Mana Vault. Tap Mox Opal and Mana Crypt to cast your Commander. Then cast Mox Amber. Tap Soul Ring and Mana Vault to cast Walking Ballista for X = 2. You'll have 1 colorless mana left over. Tap Mox Amber and use that mana to give Walking Ballista lifelink. Now you can perform the aforementioned infinite damage combo to the entire table on turn 1. This brew is just an idea of how to build around Heliod Suncrowned. I know that he's only been spoiled a couple of days ago, so there might be even more goodies in Theros Beyond Death that can be used in this deck. However, with what's already available in the current card pool, I was able to brew quite the aggravating deck. Since this deck is mono white, keep in mind that sometimes slow and steady wins the race, so try and play conservatively until you're able to assemble any of the many combos for the win. As is, this deck is a lot of fun to pilot and play. If you're interested in the deck list of this spicy brew of mine, you can find a link to it down in the description. I would like to thank all my patrons for supporting me, and a quick shout out to all my higher tier patrons, the brewers, for their patronage. I'd also like to thank anyone using my TCG Player affiliate link. That also helps out the channel. And to everyone, thanks for watching this episode of The Brewery on the Commander Tavern. I am Demented Kirby, and happy brewing.